key thing that I want to try and cover in the short slot is, one, just to review the context in terms of what the disruptive times actually are, and then to try and think about the type of reaction that there is to these disruptive times and how that has been seen, not just within the sector but also elsewhere. Say a couple of words around the emerging reactions in the sector, a number of which people will be well aware of. But what I really want to do is to try and give some examples of where disruptive times have happened in other sectors which have had some form of join to governments, or have had some sort of sense that a significant element of the way in which they're funded has been changed. And I'm not doing that in a way of saying that there's a cut and paste model, but more to say that actually there have been examples of where organisations in other sectors have responded and adapted to disruptive times and have managed to turn that into a positive for the future. And then at the end I just want to give a few observations and implications for higher education institutions going forward. So I think one of the key things about the context is that if you look at the way in which organisations have developed over time, there are often moments in their development which have a significant impact on their future and how they work. In a technology-based organisation, it's often a different type of technology that can take someone from being a market leader to suddenly just being on the outside of it. In other areas, it's the way in which funding flows in and out of that particular sector in that particular area. I think one of the difficulties that's faced higher education is that actually all of the key areas in which it sits have gone through some form of disruption in a very short space of time. And that has led to significant and massive challenges to institutions as they plan for their future. I was asked last year, I left Warwick after 14 years last summer, and I was asked, am I getting out because it's getting difficult? And I responded by saying, I am getting out because it's getting difficult. And the reality of it is that is why I saw this sort of role as an important one, because it is about looking at the breadth of opportunities that could be and would be available to universities in terms of their future thinking. I think in terms of the context as well, and it's been talked about earlier on, we've got to remember that the UK higher education system is starting from a position of strength. So its quality has not just suddenly diminished overnight, but the context in which that quality is operating has fundamentally changed. So if the sector is looking to, and institutions, strong institutions within it, are looking to retain that sense of position, whether it's OECD talking about one of the most efficient sectors in the world, or whether or not it's looking at the relative performance of universities in global league tables, the reality of it is the starting point should be a positive, and it should be about strength, and it's about retaining that strength, adapting that strength, and taking it into the future. The one thing that has changed significantly, though, is the environment in which institutions are operating. There are new players, there are new providers. International boundaries and international borders are much more amorphous than they were previously. That's not just about the way in which the UK has gone out into other parts of the world. It's also not just about the fact that the UK has had a very long tradition of bringing international students and academics in. The reality of it is, the nature of the organisation delivering and developing higher education and the marketplace there has and is changing. And that raises a question for institutions over what their reaction to that should be. So if we try to think of what appropriate reactions could be, then I think here are some examples of thinking that I think has happened in different parts of the sector. In fact, when I tried this particular slide out on one Vice-Chancellor, he said that actually that summarises everything that's happened in his institution over the last 12 months. But the reality of it is that because it's such a seismic shift in terms of what has happened, there are numerous ways in which institutions could react. One is, as it says, procrastinate now and panic later, just ignore it. And eventually when someone tells you to panic, like the fire alarm going off, you just congregate in the right place and everything will be fine. The other one is just to panic and just not deal with it at all, just panic. And And there are organisations that have, in other sectors and in the private sector, that have been seen to do that and have lost their market position very, very quickly. So now is a time, in my view, for considered thought. Yes, there is an issue around pace of decision and seizing of opportunity, but I think it's essential that actually any decisions that are taken at the moment are well considered and well thought through. The sort of top right-hand corner is around planning, so planning your way out of it. Planning your way out of it is fine as long as planning is actually translated at some point into action, because there are lots of ways in which we can plan to give ourselves comfort, but unless we do something, nothing is going to change. And then the final one could be read as a positive and a negative. A positive is actually a strong institution, a strong leadership team that says, I am confident that I am aware of what's happening in the external environment and I'm just getting on with it. I've got a strong institutional strategy and I'm going to deliver it. The other is the institution that puts its head in the sand and says we're just going to carry on exactly as we are today and we'll pop up again in a couple of years' time and have a look and see what's happened. I'm not sure what they'll be looking at if that is the case. So, in terms of emergent reactions in the sector and different individuals be aware of this, I'm deliberately keeping away from technology because Malcolm's going to talk about that. But when we talk, you've seen extensive examples around business redesign and re-engineering, and that's not just around the whole way in which individual processes are organised, but that's also in some cases around the way in which the structures of universities are organised or even their status. You're starting to see examples of where some institutions are exploring social enterprise as a model for some of the areas of their activities, but there's a significant amount of thought and thinking. There's a national obsession with shared services to some extent, and quite rightly so, because there is a lot that can be delivered with and through shared services, and there are lots of examples in the sector of how that has been successful. But I would say very strongly that shared services are a choice, and they're one of a wide range of choices. And also that if institutions are seriously going into the business of shared services, they have to be ready to go into the business of shared services, which requires some degree of change. There's the whole discussion, I'll just mention it in passing, about technology as a service, and that will come later. Strategic service partnerships, whether that's specific areas where you've got a private sector company working with an institution on a specific thing, or increasingly you're starting to see, and I think in the new year you'll see more of it, where you will see institutions working strategically with a private partner or private partners across a range of different things to exploit different types of capability and different types of strength. New venture partnerships is as open as it is described in that sense, whether that's setting up campuses internationally, moving into new areas of business, completely transforming the education model that institutions are using. But there are, again, lots of significant examples of where institutions are thinking very differently about how they can access new sources of funding in order to protect their ability to resource some of the things that they hold to be very important. New models of provision, and that's fundamentally at the heart of today, so I'll only mention it. But also, one of the final things, and this isn't a definitive list, there are lots of other examples, one around asset management, and in particular, a recognition that the old model of the fact that you would have an institution and even maybe a single academic or a group of academics that would receive significant funding for their research area, recognising that actually with a more finite pot of research, capital available and industrial funding, that actually a move towards shared assets and strategically shared assets is becoming much more on the agenda. And I would argue that in the same way that over time you've seen a move towards the use of IT as a service, you will start to see in the fullness of time assets as a service, and the major science assets being shared and developed within and across multiple groups of institutions. So I just want to give a couple of examples very briefly of some reactions to disruption that have come in different sectors. This one is particularly around what's happened within local authorities, but for each of the examples there's a particular driver, and in this case the driver is a recognition amongst most local authorities that one size should not fit all. And that's expressed carefully, because you often hear it say one size does not fit all, or one size must not fit all. But the reality of it is, when local authorities have gone through and looked at the reaction of their service users to their services, they've realised that actually if they have a single mode of delivery of service across all of the different areas that they do, actually they're automatically going to build in some degree of dissatisfaction, because different types of user both hold different things to a greater degree of significance, but secondly also have a different way of wanting to experience that service. So if you're a savvy online user and you're confident in the fact that you can do transactions and lots of things online, the reality of it is, if you're still in an environment in which you're told to physically go and do something, no matter how good a quality of service you're delivered on the other side, the reality of it is you're likely to be dissatisfied because the channel they're using is not the right one. So there has been a significant piece of work which has looked at the demographics of the different local authorities. It's been done by local authority, and it's looked in two directions. One, at the behaviours and the characteristics of different types of person within different local authorities, and then secondly, looking at the bottom up and trying to get a much more detailed understanding of what those service users are actually looking for in terms of those services. And where this has started to be piloted, what it's enabled local authorities to start to do is to exploit new channels of delivery where it doesn't have a negative impact on the user experience. The second example is a health example, and this is Guy's and St Thomas's pathology. And there were two, the source of disruption here was significant change in the health service, as well as significant shift in expectation over things like the timing of delivery of results, the quality of results, performance, etc. And there was a recognition within Guy's and St Thomas's that their ability both to meet existing demand and need was going to be limited, and also a recognition that in this one benefit of this disruption was that a marketplace was opening that actually they could access if they could develop a much more commercially attuned model to exploit. So they formed a joint venture, they brought in some new partners as well, and now are one of the most significant players in pathology within and across London, but also increasingly in other parts of the UK and also in Europe. So whilst the driver there was very much around the local pressure to do things and to do things better, improve quality, the reality of it is the key driver was to access a marketplace and a source of revenue and investment which otherwise wouldn't have been available to it. The final one is an example with Glasgow City Council, and this is an interesting one. Glasgow is one of the largest local authorities in the UK, let alone Scotland, and faced a significant challenge in two directions. One was around the whole issue of the quality of services. So there was a complete dislocation between levels of investment and the perceived quality of service on the part of the users. And secondly, there was a whole, as has been the case in most local authorities, a significant concern around the costs of delivery of service. So the driver here was to find a way of innovating, redesigning, unthinking, starting to develop new ways of delivering services with a key focus on ensuring that user satisfaction increased. So if this had only been driven by a driver which was around cost reduction, then the way in which those services would have been developed and designed would have been fundamentally different. It was actually a balance between significant need for cost reduction and also the need to retain and in fact improve user satisfaction in that sort of way. And in all of those three examples, it would be odd if I wasn't going to say it, in all of those three examples, they have involved some degree of partnership outside of the institution. It has been about recognising the strengths of an institution, the strengths of a well-selected and well-developed partnership, and actually fully exploiting that with some very key strategic drivers in place. So in terms of what I think are the implications for higher education, And I still think that having done sort of 14 years in and 1 year out, I still think my ticket card is still on the side of the sector in that regard. But I think one thing that I sort of thought about before I left the institution, but I'm absolutely convinced about now, is that there is a significant and massive range of options available to higher education, to both institutions, to influence and shape their strategic futures. And they're not things to be scared of. They're things to be considered, they're ideas to be considered, and only if they fit are they things that need to be taken forward. But I do think within the strategic horizon for institutions, the full range of possibility and options have to be considered if the long-term stewardship of the institution is in mind. So I would argue that institutions, whilst you're starting to see significant developments, that it is only scraping the surface of the type of things that could be possible. I do think, though, that there is a serious implication in terms of the skills that are required, and that in reality, in order to be able to exploit and benefit and realise the full degree of benefits from a partnership, whether it's with another university or whether it's with the private sector, it requires a skill set. And it's a skill set about identifying partners, about being able to nurture the partnership and being able to actually realise it. So when institutions are starting to look at more collaborative arrangements, one of the things I think they have to do is start by saying, actually, how good are we at partnering? And actually, do we have the skill set to be able to do that? I think, whilst I hear the point about things will settle down in some areas, I think the reality of it is this is going to be a disruptive and turbulent market. And actually, institutions themselves will just become more confident in being able to manage their affairs in that sort of way. So I don't think there's going to be a point in time when this is all suddenly going to stop. And particularly the more global the UK base is, that disruption and source of disruption can continually come from lots of different places. So I think get used to it in that sense, because I don't think that's going to change. But I do think one of the most important things is that institutions will not be able to do everything. And that's not just in terms of partnerships, that's also in terms of provision. And one of the key challenges, I think, for institutions will be how they actually focus on being able to make the right choices for their own strategic future. Thank you very much.